Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and welcome to our review of Battalion, War of the Ancients, a 2 or 4 player tactical combat wargame which sees players take control of historic armies going head to head in pitched battles. If you're into the type of game where everything your opponent does is soul-crushingly frustrating, then listen up, you might like this one.
Yeah, so as you very much alluded to, it is tight, tense, very sharp game. You're going to be commanding your armies and chucking dice to score hits, removing opponents' units, using abilities. And in some ways, in feel, it definitely harkens to the Undaunted series by the same publisher, the chucking dice and kind of fighting. But this is definitely a bit more arcadey, lighter, and a bit quicker. So before we get into how to play and what we think, please note that we are sent this as a review copy by the publisher.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, I might grab a bat, I don't know, my wrath, my blood boils.
In Battalion, you can choose to play a set battle or a mustered battle. A set battle is a pre-made scenario, whereas a mustered battle allows you to create your own matchups and your own unit formations. In either case, you'll be playing 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2, depending on the player count. The battlefield is split up into different sections, with each section having a number of units, which are made up of ranks, i.e. these individual tiles. The units may be made up of the same ranks, or they could be different ranks within the same unit, but they just have to share a class, i.e. skirmish, cavalry, and so on. Turns are fairly simple. You'll always have the chance to move units between sections by spending tactics cards, and then you can decide whether you want to command a unit or to rally. To command a unit, you place command tokens on that unit, and then decide what you want it to do. And that will depend whether it's already engaged with an opponent or unengaged. If it's engaged, then all you can do is a simple attack. If it's unengaged, you can charge to an enemy unit and then attack, or do a ranged attack if the unit is able to. Any attack of an engaged enemy will trigger a counter attack, which the opponent can do for free. To attack, you roll 3 dice as a base, and then more may be added for a variety of reasons. 8s are always a hit, and then the remainder are assigned to your attacking units, as they have different values as to what constitutes a hit. For each hit the opponent takes, they decide how to assign it, either by removing ranks within the unit, or by placing their command tokens upside down on the unit as disorder. This brings us to the rally action, which allows you to collect all of your command tokens out on the battlefield and bring them back to your player mat, and also flip any disorder tokens on units over to their command side in that order. So that means, whilst it's great to use disorder to keep your units intact after a battle, it also means you won't see that token as a command token for a while. When you do a rally action, you also need to draw a tactics card from your deck, and these are multi-use cards. You also need to draw a tactics card when one of your units is defeated. This is important because you win the game either by the central section of the battlefield being completely clear of enemy units, they left their camp undefended, or your opponent needs to draw a tactics card and there are none left to draw. When it comes to Battalion, War of the Ancients, I think there's a bit of a discrepancy between how much we both enjoy it. Whilst there's a lot I do like about it, there's just something for me that feels a bit clunky, and it feels more frustrating than other similar games to me.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you, or where you're coming from. Like, I can see where the frustrations come from, and I do think there are some rough edges, but I never felt the same frustration as you. I found it to be a really short, sharp kind of roller coaster ride of a game. I just thought that for a kind of dice chucker with some interesting tactical decisions that plays in 30 minutes odd, I just thought that was a good experience. And then because of that shortness of game, the frustration never really affected me in the way it affected you.
Yeah, I mean, that is fair. It's something that you can get over very quickly because it's over quite quickly in terms of playtime. But I guess I should just caveat with, I think you pretty much won every single game. So that might contribute to some of my annoyance. Starting with things that we do like, we really enjoy how in Battalion you feel like a real commander, as there are a lot of interesting considerations to be made when commanding. The battlefield being split up into different sections really divides your attention, as neglecting one and being decimated means your opponent may attack your central sector from an adjacent sector, leaving you with no way to defend yourself. Furthermore, commanding the same unit over and over again gets more and more expensive, so players are forced to choose between pressing for an advantage at a higher cost or diversifying their attention. This means you're making a lot of interesting decisions, and often later on in the battle you'll look back and realise what went wrong, making this a great learning experience and thus a game you can grow into. There really are only a few options available at any one time, but somehow it all combines to make a really rich decision space, and there are a lot of pros and cons to any one route of action.
In part, this comes from the slight asymmetry between the factions, of which you get 4 different ones in this box. The factions have distinct ranks, and ranks will often have abilities, which are little traits that affect the gameplay. And these are kind of somewhat different or varied between the different factions. So it creates a lot of variety and a lot of uniqueness, both in the factions and also in how the matchups occur, because it gives you different tactical considerations, particularly as a unit will take on all the abilities of all the ranks within it. So it gives you a lot to think about. And you know, even different sections of the battlefield can have kind of different considerations going on compared to others, and that just adds a lot of variety, adds a lot of replayability, and it kind of does that thing of making you want to play all the different factions and try out all the different units just to kind of get the full experience. Battalion has a particularly nasty and tight action economy, which of course we love. So command you need to spend to activate your units, but when you're attacked and you take damage, you can prevent your kind of loss of ranks by flipping the command over and assigning it as disorder. Now, the trick is that when you rally, you do not get that disorder back or that token back. You flip it back to command. So this means that while it's good to spend command as disorder to save your ranks, because then you'll be able to assign more dice and do more damage when you attack, it also means that you'll have less command actions next time you rally, and you'll also end up having to rally faster to make up for that. So it's a really nice little kind of bite point decision space, which is further complicated by the fact that the more you activate a unit, the more command it costs. And if you have a unit made up of different ranks, but they have a lot of different abilities, but that means they cost more to activate. So it all comes together into this quite nasty and quite brutal action economy system where a lot of the toughest decisions are where to spend your command. Do you reactivate the same unit? Do you spend it as disorder? And it just creates quite the nice crunch and decision space.
Moving on to some issues, one of the biggest ones for me at least was the disconnect I felt oftentimes between the taken hits and the dealt hits. Hits are taken either by removing ranks from a unit or by assigning command tokens to that unit as disorder. This means that in theory, a unit that could take 3 hits could be lost after a single hit because you didn't have enough command tokens to be able to assign as disorder. And that never sat right with me and felt a bit frustrating. Of course, there's an element of managing your command tokens so you don't end up in that situation, but sometimes it's just unavoidable because of the game state or the tactics cards that have maybe been used. On top of that, whilst mechanically we understand why you would always roll 3 dice as a baseline, otherwise it's a rich get richer scenario, it is a bit strange in feel that a single rank could be being attacked by 2 separate units and deal out enough damage to obliterate that full unit.
In a similar manner, units can only hold disorder up to, but not including their limit for holding disorder. And we actually got this rule wrong the first few times we played. We thought you could assign as much as you wanted. And funnily enough, we actually preferred it that way. We felt it gave us more player agency because if you can assign as much as you want, then you have a decision to make about how much you can assign, how much do you want to keep that unit or that rank. And there's just more decisions on the players. Whereas when there's a hard limit of what you could assign, and it's a relatively low limit in some occasions, what it meant is that one really good roll can obliterate an entire unit without you being able to do anything about it. And that increased the frustration you felt with the kind of randomness. And I think something to be aware of is that this intersection of randomness of dice rolls versus all the interesting tactical decisions you can make is going to be a kind of clash point for some, where you have a lot of like interesting options to make, but then one roll can wipe it away, and it's not going to be for everyone.
Lastly, there are a few minor quibbles. The tactics cards, in our opinion, are too variable in their usefulness. They range from not being useful in small scenarios to only being useful in certain situations to being incredibly beneficial. One time I had a deck that was majority the same card, and that card was not applicable to the scenario we were playing, and that is quite frustrating.
Our second quibble is with the dissemination of information. So at times there appears to be a real lack of complete information or important information. For example, when you get the game, you get out the player aids and you're like, oh, great player aids. They look really detailed. They look really in depth. They've got all the abilities. But then what you find is that to fit all the abilities onto the card, they've been shortened in their text. And then certain elements from their description that is in the rulebook is not on the cards. So when you're trying to learn the game or get to grips with it, you can have misinterpretations, which is what happened with us. You can have kind of like mini arguments about what it means. And then you just end up having to refer to the rulebook, which negates the point of the player aids. On top of that, they never once mention counterattacking, which is something quite crucial to gameplay. It happens during a charge, happens during attack. And it just doesn't mention when that would happen or how you'd facilitate it. And you would think that would be something that would be key to have on there. And you would never know it happens just referring to the player aids.
Yeah.
Finally, we found that there's a limited element of redeployment where you can kind of bring in troops from kind of your reserve into play or move kind of units about. But there's a real lack of kind of defining rules about how these work. You know, when you bring in troops from the reserve, do you have to bring them in one rank at a time? Can you use them to form a unit and bring them all in at once? Can you attach them to a unit already somewhere else? And the same thing if you move between different sections. Can you just attach to each other? Can you not? There's no rules for any of this, and it's all kind of quite interesting tactical things you would like to know in your description. Final thoughts. Battalion was one that I believe has divided us a little bit. Although I completely agree it has some rough edges and there are things that I would like smoothed out, information kind of clarifications provided, things like that. I really feel as though if the Osprey kind of takes this like they've done with the Imperium series, where, you know, they kind of have multiple editions and develop it. Like you could have this with more factions and like new abilities. And if there was kind of either a second edition or a kind of expansion like that to kind of smooth things out, I really think that this could be a nice little series. I just really like the quick, tight, tense gameplay. You throw some dice for 30 minutes, make some nice decisions, and then you're out, basically.
Yeah, no, I alluded to it before, but I do like it. There's just something about when you would say, hey, should we get a game of Battalion now?
Your eyes start twitching.
Yeah, I'll get a bit triggered.
Yeah.
I just found it a little bit too, on the frustrating side, where if we compare it to something like Undaunted, Normandy or the Undaunted series, I feel like there's just a little bit more agency with that, or in like what you can do and how you can approach things. And this is more flat to me and a little bit more limited. And it's just so easy for you to kind of take units out on your opponent. If you just go ahead a little bit, and I feel like you steamroll through, and maybe that's where the frustration comes from me. And there's not too much you can do to, I think, bring it back, because the tactics cards, like we said, can be quite limited sometimes, and you might have tactics cards which are very applicable. I might have drawn some which are not so applicable, and that might be the difference. And I just think there's not so much you can do in a way, because the units are already set, they're placed in a certain way. Yeah, you can move them around, but it's at the expense of something else. So maybe just a little bit too rigid for me in a way.
Yeah, I think you brought up Undaunted, and I think probably my biggest issue in terms of recommending this is that it's kind of presented here as a standard size box, but really I don't think the gameplay reflects that. It's kind of like almost a little bit of a slightly above a filler game, but in that space, because of how it plays and the kind of limited elements you get out of it, and the quickness and the dice chucking. And the thing that I find is that this is going for the price of a standard size board game, and I just don't think I would be happy paying that much and kind of and getting this, especially because Undaunted, which is why I brought it up, is a much smaller box, and I would say you get more content with the kind of campaign you get in those boxes. Here you can kind of make the battles how you want, you can design your own, so there is a lot of variety, but I just think it's a weird price point for what you get here. So yeah, so that was Battalion. I think it's certainly a game we both enjoyed. I think if you like the sound of what it's offering, then you're not going to be disappointed, but there are some rough elements essentially. So that was our review of Battalion. We hope you enjoyed it. If it was helpful, please consider subscribing, and please ask us any questions you might have. See you next time.
Bye.